Hey, I am so excited and so thankful you're here and listening. It means so much to me. And I really hope throughout these episodes you find encouragement or you can get something from it and grow. And so that is what we're here for. And also to destigmatize mental health. We're here for that. But today's episode is going to be just a little bit different. It's going to hit on some different things. I wrote a blog about 2 years ago and we're going to walk through it. And I love it. And I've heard a lot of people explain to me and talk to me about how they loved it as well. And it's a little different. So I want to fair warn you and set your expectations for what's to come. Let's go. Welcome to the Real Talk with Megan podcast, where we have candid conversations about the things that matter most. I'm your host, Megan, and we're going to deep dive into the topic of mental health. Together, we'll work to destigmatize mental health and start conversations. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready for a real and raw conversation about mental health on the Real Talk with Megan podcast. Have you ever had an aha moment where pieces of the puzzle just fit together? But also, those two pieces are from two completely different puzzles. Yeah, that's a great way to explain what you're about to listen to. Now, I also need to make a few disclaimers before I go on. If you don't find Stranger Things interesting, or if you haven't watched the latest season, first, what are you waiting for? Second, you may not want to continue on and listen to this, but you might be surprised. So I would encourage you to listen on. Now, I also would like to make a disclaimer of there will be spoilers in this. So if you haven't watched it, which again, it's been out for many years. So if you haven't watched it and you don't want to hear those spoilers and somehow you've gotten through these years without hearing any of the spoilers, you may want to wait, go watch it, and come back and listen after you've watched it. I don't want to be the reason that I've ruined this show for somebody. But again, it's been 2 years. If you're not a fan, no hate. To be honest, when the new season came out, my husband and I watched the first episode and I was like, peace, I'm out. This is too much and too intense for me, especially at night. Not long after that, when we made that decision, we talked to some friends, and because we said we weren't going to watch it, they spoiled some of the main parts for us. After that, we decided to go ahead and watch it because it made logical sense. Now, if you know me, I love things that are logical. So that was a big piece that I was having trouble of finding logical sense that came out of it. And so once I could figure out some logical sense that came from it, oh, we watched it and I absolutely loved it. So we talked about pieces of the puzzle. One piece is season 4 of Stranger Things. I know it sounds strange, but hang with me here. So that's one piece. Another piece is a book that I read a couple years ago, and it was called Find Your Place. It talked about locating your calling through your gifts, passions, and story. This book was written by Rob Wagner and Brian Phipps. It's a great book about finding the gifts and passions that God has placed on your life and being able to go out and reach those around you by sharing your story. Now, about halfway through reading this book, the author writes about David. Now, if you don't know, David was the youngest of 8 sons of Jesse. He was a shepherd. A side note, if you haven't listened to my episode about shepherds, I did back in December, you should definitely go do that. It brings a whole new light and perspective and an idea of something that could be possible. That I like to think that way, and I absolutely love that episode, so you should definitely listen to it. Little plug. Okay, so David was the youngest of 8 sons of Jesse, a shepherd, a musician, and later he becomes a king. You might know him best for taking down Goliath with his sling. I mean, we hear that even not in the church. We hear stories about David and Goliath and the underdog and all that. That's where he comes from that story. And that's David. We love to use that story to celebrate the underdogs. And the book that I was reading, it poses this question: what is your sling? They go on to say, you might not be aware of it, but what you do well, your skills at work, or a particular set of gifts you use even in a hobby, that can be your sling. I found this really interesting. But then the authors continued to talk about how David was a musician who played the harp. And then they ask the question, what is your harp? No, they're not asking if you play a musical instrument. They stated that the harp is a spiritually empowered gift, that when you use that specific gift, it has supernatural impact on the hearts, minds, and souls of other people. It's not just something you can do on your own, but it's something when you can do and you do it well, but you add God into the mix, it has bigger effects than you could do on your own. Now, these are great questions to self reflect on as you're living a life on mission and keeping Jesus at the center of your life. When you're living a life as a disciple and wanting to follow Jesus, these are great questions to ask. As I was reading this and I was reading about David more in the Bible, did you know that there was music therapy in the Bible? This one caught me off guard. I've read in First Samuel about King Saul and David coming in, but I never related it to musical therapy, and now I can't see it any other way. In First Samuel 16:14 through 23, we see King Saul being tormented by an evil spirit. The people around Saul gave the suggestion to find a good musician to play soothing music on the harp. Now, they recommended David, who we just talked about, because they knew he was a really talented harp player. Also, they saw him as a brave warrior and that the Lord was with him. Saul sent word to Jesse, David's father, and David basically became a musical therapist for King Saul. In verse 23, it says, David would play the harp, then Saul would feel better, and the tormenting spirit would go away. Now, we don't exactly know how this played out, but I like to think that we can realize, and kind of what the author points out in the book, is that when David played the harp, it had an effect beyond the natural. Something supernatural happened to drive the demons away from tormenting Saul. I really had never grasped this point before, but man, when it hit me, that moment is when two pieces of the puzzle started fitting together. Okay, stay with me here as we walk through this journey of my thought process together. I know that that can be a scary thing to walk through my thoughts, but I promise there is a point to this. Okay, so Stranger Things. Let's jump back to season 4. We see Vecna, who lives in the Upside Down. If you're not familiar, the Upside Down is an alternate dimension existing in parallel to the human world. That's a lot. Vecna is the one who enters the thoughts and the minds of people in the human world. Max Mayfield is one of the characters and is also one of the minds that Vecna infiltrates. She has a lot of past trauma that we see, and at times that consumes her mind. One of her friends finds out that Vecna is tormenting her thoughts, and they do everything they can to figure out how to beat this evil thing. That's the goal. How do we beat this? How does good prevail evil? And at the last possible second, because it wouldn't be suspenseful if it happened any other time, they find the solution that can pull her away from his grip. It's music. Okay, tell me you're not the only one starting to see these two pieces come together. David, who we heard in scripture, played the harp, and when his natural gifts were combined with God, the music that he produced was powerful enough to drive out demons. For me, music has played a huge part in my life. I mean, my degree is even in music. That's how important it was for me. And I know that in times of my life when things have been really rough, music has been there. Even when I get asked like what my favorite music genre is or song is, I don't really have an answer because it depends on how I'm feeling at the time. One thing I've learned is that music can make a huge difference of how we even perceive things. I get to be a part of a production of films through First Capital Films that's connected to our church. Watching back a scene that we've shot during the editing process before music gets added, sometimes it feels really dull and just flat. Now, that doesn't mean that the acting sucked or that the camera shots weren't great or they were completely off or blurry or soft. No, it doesn't even mean that it was a bad script. Sometimes it just feels okay. But when you watch that same scene and the background music has been added along with Foley, which are sound effects, which if you've never looked into that, look into that. It's incredible what they do to create all these sound effects. The scene that just felt okay is now bringing you to tears. This is because it's an emotional response, and it's often linked to our lymphatic system, which it plays a key role in our emotional processing in our brain. You can feel the rise and the fall of a chord progression, and it can also create a sense of anxiety when the notes are strung together just right. Music has a wide range of emotions and the power to put you in a dark place that will continue to drag you down. But man, it also has a way of bringing you out of that dark with just the right song. So, jumping back to Stranger Things, Max's favorite song was Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, a total 80s jam. When her friends figure out that music can pull her out of Vecna's grip, Dustin, one of the other characters, grabs his cassette player and a cassette of none other than Max's favorite song. He puts the headphones on her and hits play. We see Max in the upside down, first hearing the song, and then we see her see a way out of the darkness into the light where her friends are. Now, I'm not saying that Stranger Things is super spiritual, but I can just see some correlations between what I watched and scripture. And it's not just the music part. I'm going to take this a step further, so hold on to your hats. I really think that some of the writers have to have some kind of biblical background, at least enough to bring to life images that scripture presents. As we continue on in season 4, we find out the truth of who Vecna really was. And we notice we've seen this character before, just in a different form. He's in all white and orderly, working in the lab until he believes that he's more powerful than the doctor running the lab and everyone else. And then we go on to see that he deceives Eleven to take out the chip that was in his neck, which when he gets that taken out, it allows him to have his powers back. Once all this happens, all hell breaks loose. When Eleven sees what he has done, she uses her powers to blast him back into the other dimension, the upside down. And he falls into a dark realm where we see him wreak havoc on the human world through people's minds. Does this sound familiar at all? When we picture what an angel would look like, typically we imagine them in all white and a glow around them, right? And what angel do we know from scripture that wanted to be more powerful than God? Yeah, yeah, Satan. Yep, that's it. Which in turn caused him to fall from the heavens into the abyss. We see that in Luke 10:18. Jesus replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 also speaks of when Satan was kicked out of heaven. In John 10:10, it says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. That thief is Satan, and he roams around seeing who he can twist the words of, create inner doubt, and ultimately completely destroy. It sounds a lot like the mind games that Vecna was playing when he had a chokehold on somebody. Now, we may have to wait until season 5 to see the finale of Stranger Things, if it ever comes out, but we know how the Bible ends, and we know who will win in the end. That gives us hope for the future, even when we can't always see why different pieces to the puzzle fit together. We know with God, anything is possible, even relating Stranger Things to Scripture. Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Megan. Remember, you are not alone. Seeking help is a sign of strength, and taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. We'll see you next time for more honest conversations.